Hey there, my name's Tim. Thanks for checking out my video. Today we're going to make a knife and let's get started. And I got my rough drawing on there. I'm undecided how I want the back to be. So here I'm just using the angle grinder to grind out the profile. I really enjoy using the angle grinder. Most of what I do is freehand, and I usually just use the flappy sanding discs for it. I'm just drilling out some holes for the pins to go into. Got to make sure you do this before you harden it. Now that it's the shape, just going to stick it in the forge. I got the larger forge primarily for making swords, but with a knife I really only have to use a single burner. For anyone that's interested in trying any of this out, you can actually get a smaller knife forge that's a foot long for relatively inexpensive. I'm just going to use a higher grit sandpaper here to clean off the carbon that builds up from putting it in the forge and quenching it. Sometimes I'll use the grinder here instead. For grinding out the profile of the blade itself, again, I'm using the angle grinder with the flappy discs on there. I just go nice and slow and make sure my angle is the same on both sides. I look at it once in a while to make sure I'm cutting into the same depth. So here I'm just getting a quick cleanup with a higher grit sandpaper before I do my tempering process. Just want to make sure it's in a good clean condition. I could do this after the tempering, but I wanted to make sure everything was clean and good to go before I did it. Okay, so this is what I've heard called the bluing process. We're going to put it in the forge here for long enough for this to turn that blue tint. It's not as good as tempering, but it's what I can do with what I got. Obviously the thinner areas go first, but that's that color blue we're getting. Just got to go in a few more times till the whole thing is that. That's going to be as good as we get on tempering then. You can see that color? This is the original color. That's where that bluing stopped. I'm not going to worry about the handle too much because that's okay to be hardened. But this is as tempered as we can do. So we're going to let it cool now. The next part is just a lot of sanding. I use the disc sander and just keep getting finer and finer grits to get rid of all of the scratches and marks we got from using the angle grinder. So we just want to make sure we're at a real good spot for when we get to the wet sandpaper later. And this is just polishing it. Usually takes a while, and I watch some videos while I'm doing it because it really is kind of boring. So I'm going to start mixing epoxy for the handle, just equal parts, and I got to pick a couple colors of mica powder to put in it. So for this one, I chose black and red. I saturated it quite well, so I had a good solid color throughout. I did about equal parts. You'll see why here in a few minutes. I wanted to kind of mix it in between, and I'm still kind of testing things out here, and some of this is just to see how it ends up. So this is a silicone mold. The two-part epoxy won't stick to it once it's hardened. Uh, it's nice because they're the same size every time. As you can see, I went with the red and the black, poured them in at the same time from different sides, mixed it together to try and get kind of a flame pattern. Like I said, this is always a learning process, and I found that as the epoxy hardens, the colors kind of separate a little bit more, but it's all trial and error. Because of the shape of the knife and the excess on the epoxy mold, I'm cutting out a slightly curved top for the knife. And of course, drilling the holes for the pins, making sure they are lined up as perfectly as I can with where the handle is going to sit. So looking back, I really wish I would have taped off the blade itself so I wouldn't have gotten any epoxy on it. But just using the quick set two-part epoxy, stick the handles to the tang, making sure the pins get in there with plenty of epoxy as well. And even though it is a quick set epoxy, just want to make sure it's clamped and definitely sticking, especially near the top where it matters the most. Once the epoxy is set, I shave down the pins so they fit the handle and start shaping the handle. I again do it freehand. It does sand quite a lot like wood. It does have that white dust, uh, but it does form very well. I really like working with it. Once I get done with the belt sander, I usually hit it with some of the finer grit sandpaper just to polish it off. I don't go too far with it. Then I just hit it with some of the clear coat spray paint for a nice, real gloss finish. And this is the finished product. Really, thank you for your interest. Thank you for watching. I hope to have more up soon.